Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I'm your host. Alright, so this is going to be kind of a long one. We have a bunch of things to review, and not a lot of stuff to talk about in terms of news. This is for one really big thing, which is that it seems that comics legend and movie legend and all-around legend Richard Corben has passed away. Now, I'm not going to try and pretend that I was really deep into his more intimate works, which are plentiful. He had such a wild and varied imagination, and he just kind of really went with his gut with a lot of things, a lot of properties, a lot of creative choices in his own creator-owned works that felt, really personal to him. And I think that's one of the most striking things and one of the most memorable things about his work. I mainly just recognize him from behind the Neverwear shorts for heavy metal, and which in turn inspired the movie, and also his adaptation of Harlan Ellison's Vic and Blood stories, but also his work on seminal horror anthologies in comics, and also his Hellboy short stories, which were probably some of the best art Hellboy has ever had. And it's a shame, and it's a tragedy, and it's a great loss that has been felt throughout so many mediums, so many franchises, so many creative outputs. And rest in peace, Richard Corben. You will be missed, and your legacy will be secure, no doubt. You will go down in history, and I hope that you knew that, and that your loved ones find some measure of peace in all this. Anyway, let's move on to what I read this week. First off, we have Rorschach number 3, and I could sum this issue up in one sentence. Tom King writes what is basically a less interesting and less engaging and honestly less emotional version of Hit Girl. Like, it's that simple to review. But since a lot of people aren't really on the whole kick-ass train as much as I am, I guess some explanation is in order. A huge misconception, at least early on, in Mark Millar's Kick-Ass series is that Hit Girl, the subversively young mentor and basically the actual real lead hero figure, is meant to be something of a role model, that she's meant to be an ideal, or at very least meant to be a mouthpiece for Millar's supposedly conservative and far-right views, which, is patently ridiculous, and not simply because Millar isn't this neocon far-right weirdo like that, but also because that's not how Hit Girl is characterized in the least. Whole swaths of the Kick-Ass series, particularly the first 3 minis, being Kick-Ass 1, 2, and the original Hit Girl mini, are dedicated to showcasing how broken, how warped, how traumatized, and how just sort of affected Hit Girl has been as a person. This horrifying and honestly saddening effect this life and the psychological abuse that was heaped on her by her father actually was, and how permanent those effects were. This would go to the wayside in later installments in the series, but it is an indelible, memorable part of the story early on. Tom King basically rips off and copies the base premise of Hit Girl, but astoundingly refuses to include or even approach any of these pathos. Like, he has this lead character converse with the fake Hit Girl, like symbolically and psychologically in his mind, and the only thing he can seem to come up with is, wow, ain't that something for someone to go through? And that's fucking ridiculous. And yet another example of how boring, how bland, and how pointless this entire maxi has been so far. 2 thumbs down. Moving ahead, we have Immortal Hulk number 41. And this was a really good issue, and one that was surprisingly so much more weighty in terms of character focus and development than I expected. With all the promotion, I was fully ready to be semi-underwhelmed by another short, thrifty, semi-engaging punch-em-up issue. But nope, this has to be one of the most recent issues to take the fullest care of pacing within itself. I was astounded by how much ground it felt it covered by the end. It felt like a full experience, and a rounded-out read, and that's something I really enjoy with this series. It's not something that I come across all that often, but it is a joy. It's basically just Ben and Joe talking man-to-man for the entire issue, and trying to make sense not only of this conflict they're in, but also of their lives and how they've both dealt with hardship and pain post-empowering. It's touching and sweet, and it's a powerful allegory for, dysmorphia and other trans-related emotions and stripes, which makes sense that the trans character does do the narration for this. So highlighting that thematically in the actual story being told was pretty damn good. And hats off to Ewing for making the best non-milestone issue in months. So, 2 thumbs up. And we're not done with Immortal Hulk, because next we have the King in Black tie-in issue. And this is maybe the weakest of the single issue one-shot tie-ins that this series has had so far. And I'm not counting the Defenders tie-in, because that was actually just like an issue in a stealth miniseries. That's not to say that this was bad. It's a really good issue. But in terms of actually adding a layer to the story at hand, it does feel pretty wafting. The one thing it does in terms of story is give Savage Hulk a well-needed win. He's been through a lot, and this issue is primarily a respite for the Jolly Green Giant. It feels earned and a nice breather in this incredibly tense and fraught end stretch. The other thing in this issue's cap is that it's a silent issue, relying mainly on the visuals and skills of guest artist Iron Cutter, and it's magnificent. He manages to nail and enhance every emotional beat necessary, and a few that just floor you with their simplicity and impact. I loved it in that regard. It's also a Christmas issue, and despite some horror and some depressing elements, it does seem to fit the season rather well. So Merry Christmas one and all, and I can't wait for next month. 2 thumbs up. Moving ahead, we have The Lords of Misery, which is the years in the making, and it's Eric Powell's long-awaited sequel to the Goon Saga. And it's in fact been so long in the waiting that it's basically been supplanted by the other official Goon sequel by Eric Powell. And that's really the rub with this. It's not enough to stand on its own, and it's also not really the epilogue to the Goon that many were hoping it would be. And at a paltry 50 or so pages, it doesn't really have that much time to develop as a story, or to even justify why it was even touted its own thing way back in the epilogue of the Goon's first series finale. It feels like a random Hellboy one-shot, which isn't a bad thing, but not really so much when it's meant to be this pivotal moment in the Goon story that fills some gaps in between the first and second series. Because it really doesn't. It feels just like this random, if kind of engaging, nonsense, and even the setup for the second series, which is already like in the double digits in terms of issues, is waved off as inconsequential. It's overall just a flimsy as hell read. There's some good beats and nice moments, but that's all there are here. Nothing to really hold this together as an actual substantive story, which is a shame because like Chinatown, the Mr. Wicker story, this could have really been something. Overall, 2 thumbs middle. I hope this story does get followed up on, because otherwise, it's a bit of a whimper, and there is some potential here, and there's a lot of ground to cover. Moving ahead, we have New Mutants number 14, which is basically just a soft relaunch of this title with a different writer at the helm. And honestly, it's off to a good start. What really marred the beginning arcs of this run was a lot of inconsistency and being saddled with some of the most boring aspects of the Dawn of X world building. This issue just feels a lot more confident about its plot, its characters, and its stakes, which is great. Time will tell if it will capitalize more on it, but overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. I'm hedging my bets. Next up, we have X-Force number 15. Also decent. Percy's X-Force stuff has always been his strongest in this era of X-Men, and to finally get back to that makes that all too clear. It's basically Beast's Wild Ride, and we're all strapped in. There's not much else to say. I kind of want to see where this heads in, and it's just a fun, thrilling, and honestly kind of head-scratching read, but in a good way. Overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. And lastly, we have Kick-Ass vs. Hit Girl number 2. And just to finish my thought about Rorschach number 3, what I meant by Hit Girl being more characterized at the beginning of the Kick-Ass series was that near the end, especially in the Hit Girl ongoing, Millar and his creative teams really started to buy into the hype of Hit Girl as being badass. And so a lot of the psychological, emotional depth the character had started going by the wayside and started being less important to her pulling off a lot of, badass stuff. And I felt that was really a shame. And so I really hope that, and in some degree it does, this mini touches upon that a little bit more. Because even though the two characters who are supposed to be, crossing over and coming to conflict don't really meet until like the very, very final pages, there is some essence of that. There is some essence of Hit Girl in this issue that feels a little more vulnerable, that feels a little bit more at ends, and it felt a lot more like the original than her flanderized, over-the-top, exaggerated version that we've been seeing in her proper ongoing that just finished recently, and that's really more of what I want to see. I do like their back and forth. They only have a couple lines exchanged, but I think Steve Niles has a really great grasp on the character and their headspace and kind of their inner voice, which is really good. Like I said, nothing really happens, but I do think that things have been set up tonally that makes the atmosphere of this feel really, really authentic. So overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle, and I can't wait to finally see them actually come to blows in what is probably the midpoint of this mini. So, fingers crossed. Anyway, that's it for this week. Next week is going to be, I guess, already Christmas. So, I just want to wish you happy holidays and that you have a great season and that everything's going well and that you and yours are staying safe. And I'll probably try and put up the best of 2020 poll soon after that. So, and I just want to give a shout out to Carreras for the show at DOTEMCE. Please check it out and give them as much love and following as you can. Anyway, see you again next time and hope you have a good one.